First off, good morning. My name is Michael Schrag. I was asked to moderate and facilitate this. I'd like to thank Sarah and echo her thanks to Rocket and to the panelists here and to all of you for being here. I think this is a terrific subject to discuss. And it's a terrific subject to discuss in no small part because we have people here who have really at the coalface and are dealing with the hard issues both on the policy level and on the implementation level. And my goal is that we hear them out and we get their sensibility here, but it's a nice, intimate-sized group, and so this is going to be less presentational than conversational. The one thing I do want to stress here, and I don't want us to get bogged down in semantics, but I don't want to ignore semantics either. Governance really is different than management. And summing up your management practices, even if they're best practices, and calling it governance, that's not the answer to this. So what are the organizing principles for governance? And what are the meaningful, measurable, actionable distinctions between governance and oversight and data management? That's what we really want people to come away with discussing. And one of the reasons why I agreed to do this, coming all the way from Cambridge, one of the reasons why I agreed to do this is, remember that phrase, that data is the oil, the new oil? Of course, that doesn't sound so good with oil at $40 a barrel, but still. There's no dispute from any of the organizations that data as an asset is becoming more important. No, everybody's bought into that. Whether it gets converted into predictive analytics or whatever. Data, the importance and potential of data as an asset is rising. And that means governance by default, if not by design, becomes more important as an issue. And that's the kind of discussion that organizations need to have, and forgive me for putting it this way, not just at the level of the people who run the systems and the processes, but actually, I think, boards of directors, not just management committees. And when you toss in, as we will, the security aspects atop the risk management aspects, as well as the value creation aspect, it becomes one big honking mess of conflicts there. And so that's what we want to discuss. So we're going to do some quick answer, opening up. But Barbara, what's the question to the both of you, and Tasso will have a chance to answer this if and when he materializes, is what's the most important thing you want this audience to know about how you define and then practice data governance at EMC? And if you want to give us the context of how that might be changing, in the midst of an acquisition. Your total flexibility in how you choose to answer that.
Well, I think really the key message is it's all about the business strategy, right? And I think governance starts in IT very frequently because they're trying to make certain applications speak together. But it's really about what's the business strategy and business problems that you're trying to solve. So I find governance is more successful when you focus on solving a business issue, right? And how are you going to increase revenue? How are you going to focus with identify with your customers? I know at EMC we have, I'm going to call it governance 2.0, because I always felt like a janitor before, because governance was about cleaning up dirty data. It's no longer that. It's about fueling the analytics engine, right? So a focus now is on the governance really takes into account what are the various, we call them business value cases, and making sure that the data stewards around that and business owners.
So for governance, your unit of analysis is not use cases, but business value cases.
Business value cases.
Give an example.
So a business value case you might want to say is disk drive optimization. So our goal is by using big data, we can predict which disk at which time could potentially go down at a customer site. So for us, we want to make sure the customer has no downtime, right? So we're getting into the predictive analytics, but more important, I transitioned out of IT 18 months ago and I lobbied 4 years to do that. at EMC, and I finally was successful. And also at my previous companies, I have a healthcare background that always started in IT. So when you can really equate it to the business owns the data, and they're trying to get value from that data, then it's more successful.
I'm going to follow up on some of that, but I want Andy to give his response as well. And then you will see my efforts to create conflict as opposed to consensus.
That's okay, I'll start out with some conflict. Which is, I think as you look at data, and therefore you look at the governance of data, there are two drivers, and Barb just very eloquently elucidated one of them, which is what could go right. And quite often people stop at that, right? I'm a product manager, I want to use my data to do a thing, and it's not even to use data, I want to build the software to do a thing, and I like to focus on what could go right. But the other big driver is, and what could go wrong? Right? You have to think about, is this data that we want to put into some massive data lake? Like it's all of our employee records, or maybe it's all of the records of everybody who's ever held a clearance, if you're OPM. And so what could go wrong with that data? And what could go wrong with this initiative? And what are our unacceptable losses?
So you're the glass half empty guy.
Well, I actually, if you're calling me an optimist, yes. I was a bartender. Glass half empty meant somebody's been drinking. So I think, but it has to be both of them. It is not one or the other. And too often what happens is people come in and they say, well, I'm about what's going to go right and I'm going to ignore the things that could go wrong.
Let's just quickly connect.
Or the opposite.
Let's quickly connect that. So you heard Barbara talk about business value case.
Mm-hmm.
Your immediate reaction would be risk-adjusted business value case.
Yes.
How well does EMC do with risk? Is risk a trailer or is it baked into the way you do the business, prioritize business value cases?
It's baked into the business value case. So we actually have legal and security sitting on our data governance councils, right? And we call it actionable governance. So the other part I found is you can't do governance on Excel spreadsheets, right? It's really hard when you're collecting your data quality issues. So we actually brought up a portal and a solution, and we have actionable governance that sends emails out to data stewards. So all these business value cases that come in that want to consume information from the lake do get those immediate notifications, and we have a risk review around them.
What's your counterpart to that? Akamai?
So I'll admit that we're not nearly that sort of centralized and coordinated on it. It's much more focused at the business unit. We're more like a data wetlands than a data lake. In the,
See, that did go over well.
See, it works. We're debating. I was going to use data swamp, but apparently that's been coined. So I'm going to data wetland because it sounds much nicer. You want to hang out in the wetlands, in that there are places where the stewards of the data have made it accessible so that it can be shared, and they've interconnected it, and places where they haven't. And my favorite example for this is actually our time off database. So employees take time. We have an unlimited time off policy, but we still highly suggest that you track it. And in most companies, you hear that database and you think that's either run by finance or HR. It's actually run by my organization. It's an information security system that runs it. It totally happenstance. What happens when 10 years ago you don't have funds to do anything, and you happen to have a PHP developer who can write an app to do this in the security team. And so we have it, and we believe in interconnecting our data. So things like when we send people security awareness notifications, say, hey, it's time to do security awareness, we said, hey, let's check to see if they're on vacation this week, and if so, let's just not send it to them. Right. We'll wait until they get back. And everybody else said, oh, this is great. So like half the company ties in now to our time off database. And there's no way if this had been in HR or finance, that as the stewards of the data, they would have let anybody talk to that system. Right? And so there's an example when you think about sort of that wetlands, which is this piece is connected, but very related data is not connected. And so we look at it as there's data that's monetizable, that's what gets put into lakes. There's data that makes the company more efficient, and that doesn't. And I think that probably is very true for many other organizations, so I'm not like airing my own dirty laundry on that one, and that's sort of a standard.
We're going to come back to that, because I think that's very important. There's a wonderful line from Kenneth Boulding, you can divide the world into two groups of people, those who divide the world into two groups of people and those who don't, monetizable and efficiency. But I want to go back to some of the language here. You've both used, unprompted by me, the word steward, data steward. But Barbara, when you were making your comments about don't begin with IT, begin with the business unit, you say that business owns the data. But stewards don't necessarily own things. And one of the bad things I've observed, or shall we say counterproductive things that I've observed in larger organizations, particular business unit organizations, is that because they think they own the data, it's their data, and their notion of sharing it or writing that API or exposing that API is not a top or even a secondary concern for them. So how do you draw, culturally and operationally, how do you draw the line between getting business, even though they're owning the data and maybe a language of be accountable for the data, how do you get them to think of themselves as stewards so that they share, or at the very least make the data shareable?
And I think that that's still a big challenge. So I'll tell you, no one wants to own the data, right? Because they all know it's bad, right? So many times. So it's a real challenge to find those data stewards who govern. We've taken a little bit of a different approach too. So we really want to focus on collaboration. So data lake does not solve the problem of data hoarding. So you'll still find sales does not want to share their data, say, with my group, TCE, Total Customer Experience, versus manufacturing.
Why not?
Well, because, their power, because they have the data. So they don't
And
want to
they-
share it.
So actually, my experience of why sales doesn't like sharing their
Yeah.
data is because they know how fraudulent their pipeline data really is, and they don't know.
So
Do you agree with that assessment?
yeah, I think I do.
We'll see what Dell says about that. You go on, yes.
So I think the challenge that we have through governance, and I actually don't like to even use the word governance, so anytime I speak, it's about collaboration and knowledge sharing, right? So, we always kind of laugh if you have that person who knows exactly how to calculate, I'm just going to say revenue or install base. If they leave the company, no one else knows how to do it, right? So it's about how do you capture that knowledge. And so through our governance councils, we have what we call an end-to-end value stream governance councils. We follow the whole process. So a good example is
Value case, value stream.
Yes.
Okay.
For instance, it's called campaign to retain. So how do you go out and work with a new customer, get that business all the way through? How do you retain them through a customer experience? How do you make sure that they're going to come back and do business with you?
And that's part of governance.
Yes.
So we're at the meeting, and you're talking about retained customer retention, growing the account, internal service, and sales basically isn't sharing their pipeline with the sales. I don't know whether you have teams or individuals, but let's just say there's more of a lag in getting information that customer experience and accounts payable and maintenance or service wants. What does your governance council say or do?
So I'd say we facilitate and mediate, so our council
Oh gosh,
goes up.
no, facilitate and mediate.
So it will
I'm
go
leading
up.
here. Okay?
Yes.
What does that conversation sound like?
It will be, we have what I'd say a data lake working council, so they have all their peers in that council. So they get a lot of pushback from all the other functions and a lot of peer pressure if they don't share their data. So again, it's cultural, it's about starting to break down those walls. If it really comes to be problematic that they're not sharing data that should be accessible, and I want to say there's a lot of data that we wouldn't want to share, right? So there's still access management in a data lake. Then it goes up to a level, we have what we call an executive steering committee. And they will help really be our sponsors to break down those walls and prioritize what data gets shared.
You just don't want to use the word enforcer, do you?
Right, no.
Okay. Is that for a cultural reason, or are you just being polite?
I don't think.
Because that's what it is.
Yeah, it is, but I don't think anyone wants to feel forced to have to share their data, so it's more about coercion and, getting them to come.
So let's make this an easier question for you to answer. Let's go back to your prior incarnation in healthcare, where these silos are even more distinct and people are even more enmeshed, and they can use regulation as an excuse not to share. What did you learn about enforcement and incentives from your healthcare background in the data governance and collaboration issue?
So it was obviously easier in healthcare, right? Because you did have that big stick, I would say, to drive governance and collaboration. Certainly being in a high-tech company, that's a little more challenging to do, right? Because there wasn't the appetite. So it all gets back to, I believe, do you have the right sponsor at the top to advocate for this?
Who is your sponsor?
Today, the sponsor is the president of Global Services. So I used to sit in IT. That I don't feel that it was enough sponsorship to get the business interested, but once he took it on, it had a lot more clout and had a lot more energy in the business to take it on.
So the use of the word enforcer is an interesting one. One of the things I learned in the military is the first rule of command: never give an order you know will not be obeyed. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing with most things that are governance, is you don't actually have the authority to say no. Therefore, you should never say no. Right? You have to coerce, you have to guide, you have to educate, you have to subvert, you have to do lots of things that we don't like those words sometimes.
That's why we use them.
But that's how you have to get your job done. So the way that we look at sort of data governance is because we're still living in the wetlands. We roll that up under our product governance in many cases. So where we're productizing things built on data, we're going to look at the data through the lens of the product as well. So we're going to think about how are we engineering this and how are we making it safe and what data does it have. And very early on I learned the lesson that I'm not allowed to actually say no to any products. Right? I'm not empowered to say yes, so therefore I can't be empowered to say no. But what I can do is I can say to the VP of products or the president of products, I can say, I don't think they're making wise risk decisions. And that's a far more powerful statement than no.
What's the culture of risk at Akamai in this regard? You've done events. How do customer demands and expectations influence, distort, enable, improve, or undermine the risk, glass half full, glass half empty?
So one of the things which I learned very late, I'd like to say early, but it took me a long time to acknowledge this, is that anytime somebody would say, nobody would ever use our product that way, they were wrong. You could come up with the most outlandish possible thing you can think of, a way somebody could use our product, and I can show you something worse that they're doing. So customers heavily influence us on that. Because
is that true for you as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? That where there are places we said, well, this risk would bother us, but nobody's actually going to do this, that's a big red flag for us now to say, no, you have to build it on the assumption that customers will do the worst possible thing.
The bastards, yes.
Yeah. Now on the data side, what the things is we have three sources of data. We have data that originates from our customers, all of their usage, people who are attacking them. And what we found is that mostly everybody in the company is very respectful of that data. They understand that the customer owns the data. We've done a very good job of advocating that. There are places where we don't have clear data stewards for some of that data. And so other people sort of have to step in and advocate on behalf of the customer. But culturally, that is customer data. Sometimes, especially in this security, I've discovered that security products are the people who are the least careful about anything. Performance products totally grasp you shouldn't look inside customer data sets. Security products but it would be really helpful if I could just keep track of every credit card we saw. Can't do that. There's data that is sourced by our platform itself. Like we have network partners, we know how the internet works, and everybody sort of understands that's our data. And there's pieces of it that if we advertise loudly, we would lose the data. We could tell you which network on the planet is the worst one in any possible dimension you want. We don't, because those networks are all our partners. And if we started naming and shaming them, they'd stop being partners, and that would be a bad plan. And so people understand that.
Right.
And then the third is the data source from our employees. And this is the interesting thing of coming back to ownership, is HR thinks they own that data.
Right.
The employees own that data. But HR doesn't behave that way, and finance doesn't behave that way. And so we find them making decisions on that data that you sometimes say,
isn't there a council in this? Who does the oversight of those sorts of decisions that in fact may increase the very vulnerabilities that
so where they're clear security ones, that oversight rolls up into security. Okay. But there's not a sort of holistic, how are we managing employee data? And I'd be surprised if that existed elsewhere.
Why?
Because
You
where
clearly have this understanding, how
Because
come
we
I was
don't
run
have
by?
any union.
Well, that-
There's
that's-
one reason there
Okay,
isn't.
well,
So that's right. So there's not an enforcement
Right.
stick from outside.
Right.
But even if there were, I don't think it would really drive the right mindset. What it would do is actually, then HR would say, well, I'm the owner and I'm accountable to this regulation.
Right.
Not I'm accountable to each individual employee.
Right.
And it's around how they make decisions, which is much subtler than what are they doing with it. Like
Are
they're
they
not,
transparent enough for you?
no.
Are they transparent enough for you? Do you think that EMC, because of its commitment and your commitment to promoting collaboration and sharing, that even if they don't go along, that there is an expectation of transparency that makes your life significantly easier, even if enforcement is not?
Right. I'd say yes. So, again, we're rolling out a lot of education through EMC, but one of the guiding principles when we brought up governance for our data lake was transparency. So we actually brought up a data catalog that anyone in the company can go look at what data assets are in the data lake.
How did it get tagged?
We have the data stewards working on some of that.
So you do an
IT.
ontology, do a folksonomy for your data catalog?
Yes, and what's really important is BI reporting is very different than how business uses the data. So that's been one of the biggest gripes, is that, IT has gone in and named a table, and I tell you, I've looked at them and I have no clue what they are, right? So our goal is to create really what we call, I think of it more as, I shop on eBay, right? So I just love it when I get a good catalog that I know what I'm buying, and that's what we want to create for our data scientists and analytics community. That they can go in, and the business has put the descriptions, key attributes around that, so you can decide whether that's good information you want to use in analytics. So I'm a huge supporter of good business metadata, right? And I think
And by default or by design, you believe that should be part of the governance.
Yes.
That's a governance principle. Great metadata is not an IT practice, it's an oversight principle.
yes.
Is your recruiting data in there? Like your pipeline?
No, not yet. The only reason I say, because how we developed our lake was use case by use case. So we didn't just turn on the floodgates and pump everything into the lake. So we started it based on use case, and we keep adding to that, right? So it keeps getting
But
larger.
see, he can't do that because you have a lake and he has
I
wetlands.
got wetlands. Well, so this is one that I love, that I talk about, and I beat up my HR partners all the time. Because diversity is very important for us.
That's a microaggression.
It's a topic.
Careful.
No, this is a macroaggression. Let's be very clear. Right. So diversity is something we care about. It's in the mission critical goals of the company and every executive. And I go to recruiting and I say things like, "Look, we're hiring a director of compliance right now. We got to 6 candidates that we were going to phone screen. 4 of them came from recruiting and 2 came from our networks. The 4 from recruiting are all white men. The 2 from our networks are both women." And so I'm looking at that, and I'm like, this is anecdata. Like, I can't make decisions on this. Except it feels...
I love that phrase, by the way, anecdata. Remember that. Sorry.
Right? And it feels a lot, but it feels like almost every time that we're getting here, what are the resumes that come from recruiting? There's this bias that is far more extreme than even the bias we expect out of industry. Like, we do not expect to get 50% qualified females to 50% qualified males, because that's not the pool we're drawing from. We'd like to increase the pool. But from what I know of the pool, it doesn't match the resumes that I get to see.
Right.
So I say to recruiting, this is a data governance. Just show me the demographic information. You're collecting it.
Excellent.
Hand me all the demographic information for every stage of the pipeline. No, that's protected data, right? Now, I suspect that much like the sales data I referenced earlier, it's not that it's protected, it's that they don't like what's in it, or maybe they're not really collecting or looking at it. And I wonder how many other people have that same problem. So, question, how many people can get demographic data of their pipelines for their open positions? Anybody? Somebody, I see somebody with a hand up.
I work in HR.
Peter, do you share it with the business?
I do, however.
Excellent.
The
You don't have to work
challenge,
for us?
but the challenge is framing the question in the proper light, so that, for example, recently the police department had a new cadet class that they were recruiting for, and they asked, well, can we see where our applicants are coming from? I said, yeah, I've actually got a prototype of that. However, when you fill out your applicant profile, you need to understand, back to the catalog, you can select your ethnicity. It's actually required, but you can pick and spec, not
Yep.
specified. So to the extent that our applicants provide that data, we can aggregate it for you and show you by zip code what your applicant pool looks like, because everyone has to be a city resident, City of Boston resident to even apply. So they can see the results and then boost up their marketing, boost up their outreach in those zip codes or neighborhoods where they feel like they're not getting representation. But there are many different questions that could come in about recruiting, and to say, well, I want to see all our applicants, the answer is, well, no, you can't.
I just want the demographic data. I don't want to see the applicants themselves. I just want the
Right.
summary demographics.
Right, and that was the first time, which was about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. So there's been a long time where people are, in my mind, suffering without that information because we don't have an institutional policy to facilitate that kind of recruiting. But part of that problem is having, the constituency, the people that want it, that are demanding it, but then having the discussion where those demands are butted up with well, here's the reality of what we can do.
Great, thank you.
So, it's very helpful, and I want to ask just one more
Yep.
question of you, and then we're going to turn this more into an open conversation. I want to go back to the point that you made, Andy, about monetizable versus efficiency, although there's certainly overlap between those. It's clear, with the governance example, if we map it into the quote-unquote real world, what's been one of the most important trends we've seen in corporate governance and oversight? Activist investors. Investors who basically say, hey, to the board, you're not being good enough stewards. There's a lot of untapped value, and we want you to tap that value. And I want to map that into the data issue. So one of the things that I would look for of a governance committee and people who, particularly with Nakama, with the kind of data assets that you have, which is, okay, how are we looking to monetize our data? And given this monetization roadmap, are there other data sets or data sources we should be acquiring or incorporating or writing APIs to, et cetera? And at the flip side, efficiency and compliance as well. Are we doing a better job? Are we reducing the costs of compliance, et cetera? How do you deal with, if I'm on your board and I look at this, how do you answer this? Well, you're going private, but Michael Dell is no walk in the park either in that regard. How do you show what metrics, KPIs do you offer to say, here's how we are using our oversight, our data governance mechanisms and policies to improve and increase how we monetize, how we make business processes and value cases more efficient and effective?
So, like I said, what I find has been a game changer for us is the data lake, because we're using Tableau, and if folks have used Tableau, what they're seeing with the dashboard combines in one, I'm going to say pane, data from sales, data from like a net promoter score, what are the open service requests. So now we actually give our service account reps with their iPad, they can go out to have what we're going to call a more prescriptive conversation. So it's about how do you change a customer conversation and make it more personalized, right? And so that breaks down those functional barriers, because now it's no longer just a sales report. It's a service account dashboard.
And you're using that as a mechanism to create accountability around data. So you really are not just governance, you're about assigning accountability and responsibility in that regard. And those KPIs are the measures of accountability.
Yes.
What's the pushback you're getting?
Actually, we're getting a lot of our, the adoption has been much quicker than we actually anticipated. So really what we see with the business value cases that come in, we actually have a section that says what value is going to drive for the companies, because we have so many that in many cases we can't meet all the capacity, right? So we are looking, what are the new data sources? A good example, someone came in, we want to bring in all Salesforce data now, right? So we're off looking, bringing in third-party data as well as incremental source systems. So we work with that to say which is the highest impact for the company say for this quarter, right? And then we try to prioritize them through the working council. So we actually do try to quantify the business benefit. Because oftentimes, a function comes in that might have the money to support an innovation space in the data lake, but it might not be the right priority for EMC, right? So we vet those out every month through the working council and our executive committee. The other part is I find, data, unless you can put a cost behind it, you're not going to get attention. So I'm going to call it the more operational data quality. We're able to come in with a cost impact of not cleaning up that data. And so that's how we leverage, I'm going to say the more subject matter experts, is we actually put a cost on what we can either improve on revenue. I'll just use an example. They were missing data that was key to calculate logistics and freight charges. So EMC at one point nicely paid for a lot of free shipping to our customers. That's lost revenue, right? We were able to fix that, all because it was missing one field in a material master. And when you're able to quantify those examples, it gets a lot more attention than just saying your data's dirty, right? That's a general statement.
Let me quickly follow up on that before turning to Andy's answer. Is that one of the ways you get to master data management faster, or does master data management become less relevant when you're just making sure that the tributaries to the data lake have good quality to them and are clean?
We've now embedded, so I would say, to me, data quality is always continuous improvement, right? So there's always opportunity. And what we bring to the table as well is data quality is just a measure, a metric. It always says to me there's a broken business process when your quality is bad. So we actually go back and work with the business about how to improve their process to improve data quality. So it's not just about a one-time cleanup. It's about what's broken, and let's see if we can fix it. And we actually leverage our Six Sigma teams as well. So I use them there within our total customer experience team. Yes?
Wow.
So
Very good.
So we're in a sense we're blessed, right? I hate saying unicorns are unique because everybody is unique and special.
Right.
But in a sense we're a company that is built on taking data and doing interesting things with it to make the internet suck less.
Right.
And our security business units, as much as I maligned them several minutes ago, are the people who are actually best at that. Right? We can tell you, first request comes in from somebody, we can tell you how many web attacks that IP address has done, and how much spam they generate, and whether they're actually a bot, and all of this information, because we're mining this massive data set. And so now we sell products that are based on this intelligence that we gain. So in a sense, we have the company's already so focused on how do we monetize the data, that the monetized data places don't need somebody governing them to say, hey, do better with the data.
Right.
Because they're already doing with the data, and they want to do better.
Right.
I often find that when you try to tell somebody to do better with data, what you're really saying is do something with your data, right? You've got this data and it's moldy and cobwebby and nobody's looking at it. And if you would do something with the data, that would inspire you to clean up the data because you're trying to use it.
But your people don't have that issue.
But we don't really have that issue there. Where we have it are places where it's harder to monetize. And we often do improvement not focused on data necessarily, but on process. So as an example, we just spent the last 3 years rebuilding and changing how we do our entire sales pipeline from lead to cash. Because it was literally, we were in places where people were transcribing into Excel spreadsheets data from one system, or exporting, if this sometimes system would let you actually export to Excel, and then running manual changes on it to then shove it and import it into another system.
The old ETL model.
Yeah, and the number of errors you get, and just the amount of inefficiency, right? We looked at, and I'm not going to give the number, but the cost for us to sign a contract was massive, just from how many times you had to move this piece of data.
It's the same point that Barbara was making about broken. It was a broken process.
Right, it's a broken process, and so we didn't look at it and say, well, we have to clean up the data. We said we have to clean up the process.
Right.
Now, as a result of that, we actually now have this nice, rich data set. Now we know that that the lead piece of it is really not true. Our sales reps don't put their leads into the system.
Right.
Right. What they do is each of them has their own little private list of leads.
Right.
They work them, and they're not going to put it into the system until they know that they're actually going to go somewhere with it. Because if they say, oh, I've got this lead that I'm going to go sell to Rocket Software, but I know it's going to take me 9 months. The problem is they put the lead in, and now all of a sudden they're being measured on how fast they can go.
Right.
So they'll hold it in the back of their head, and they'll keep track of it. And when they know that they're now on the contract pipeline, they'll put it in as a lead.
Right. So my suggestion is you go around and have people take pictures of the Post-it notes they have on
Well, no, my attitude was, we have MDM on all of their devices. Let me just track where they're going and see which companies they walk into and auto-populate the lead system out of that. Wouldn't that would be awesome? Until they all quit on me, but.
No, this is, I just want to say that one of the things I'm taking out of this, and we're going to go to your comments and questions on this, is it's really interesting that if you take data governance seriously as an organizing principle, it becomes your wedge and window into process efficiencies, collaborative opportunities that you couldn't just do if you're saying, let's do Kaizen locally. Let's do Six Sigma locally, because the issue, the data, the bad data is a symptom as well as a cause of a problem, because it's a holistic enterprise. So you're just going to.
So actually, I'm going to be really contrarian. I'm going to say that having data governance itself is a symptom of failure within your business.
Well, geez, you wait for 45 minutes to say that?
Because I didn't think about it.
You should lead
But in the
with
same way,
that.
no. But so look at this example we just had, right? We just walked through and said, we could have approached that from a data governance perspective,
Right.
And said, look, we have to improve lead to catch because the data is so painful. But what made it work was that we had governance, right? And data is a piece of it. And so in many places we have companies that have lots of data and no governance,
Right.
and data governance is a way of tackling the problem. There could be better ways, but this is consumable, because the ways that we might think about of tackling business governance generally require fire everybody in charge and start over.
Right. The whole notion, the one analogy to this, and I can't give the name of the company, but it was when I was a part of a Microsoft thing, is should they have a process governance as opposed to a data governance? And it was very, very interesting to me, because there's another Fortune 5 company. Their big debate is, should we have a data governance? Should we have analytics governance? Should we? And they're obsessing on the governance. But my takeaway from this, and we'll turn this to you, is there really is a difference between managing something and doing governance and oversight. There's a qualitative as well as a quantitative difference. And I think that's one of the things that you all have really successfully. I think you're, on one dimension, I'm very sympathetic. On the other, it's because there was a governance point of view as opposed to a management point of view, that sort of literally gave you a different perspective on what was going on. And that perspective is worth something.
Well, I think that you need governance, right? And in the same look, I do security governance.
Right.
It's my principal job. And there are people who say, well, why do we have security governance? If we could just make good decisions, you wouldn't need a CSO.
Right.
Great, I would love it. The day that I can be unemployed because everybody's making wise decisions, I'll happily go retire somewhere. I'm not holding my breath.
Right.
It's about what are the levers that you can reach into that people will understand. And if you have a lot of data, and basically built data, the data governance is that's a lever that people can grok and they can hang on to. And if somebody came in and said, look, we're a process-driven company and we're gonna do process governance, great. But I suspect that if you walked into EMC and said, we're gonna do process governance, that probably wasn't something people could have easily hung on to in the way they can hang on to data governance. And it's easy for people to hang on to security governance.
Although I think use cases are an interesting way of aggregating.
Right, so I think, we are kind of trying to change this now. We call it actually information asset management, because we believe information or data should be treated as an asset, just like any other physical inventory, right? And, back in my old manufacturing days, you had the ABC classification. We're doing the same thing with data. We focus on the data that's most important to our customers and impacts cross-functional teams. So I think often data governance teams can focus on the wrong data too, right? And so unless you can really, like I say, bring the value, and I really view it as my team's role is to help drive the value of that data so that it can be monetized, right?
Excellent. Questions, comments? Sir?
Just a very basic question. Data governance has become a buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I asked everybody here to write down the definition of data governance, we'd probably have 30 different definitions. What is data governance, and how do you guys define it?
Yeah. I hate using the word governance,
Yeah.
by the way. I think
But that isn't
before-
your title, is it not?
It is, yeah. That kind of stuck with our president, right? So really, again, I view it as how do you drive collaboration? It kind of has 4 prongs, right? How do you do information asset management? How do you drive collaboration across those key stakeholders? And nothing's more fun than getting in a room when you put those end-to-end teams and you have accounts receivable telling the salespeople what challenges they have, right? So now they get to hear it from their peers, and that's the first time. And then we focus on quality and trust. So it's really around the people, which is a collaboration. It's around asset management. And then it's also around making sure you have trust and quality.
But forgive me for following up in this way, but notice that at the core of her answers are principles, not punch lists. One of the
Yeah.
big debates in governance is governance about assuring compliance, box tick management, versus principles of collaboration? So it's fair to say you take a principles-based approach to that, and that's a non-trivial. And the practice is how do those principles get translated into processes and KPIs that people are held accountable for?
True, and again, where the big focus on is the customer experience, because you have to make sure that the customer is satisfied or you're not going to be able to retain them. So we've really shifted from, like I said, traditional data governance to the total customer experience and what's important to them.
So your 30 different ways to define it, was that before you left the table and got to the rest of the room? Because governance is one of those buzzwords.
Exactly.
So I generally define governance in general, and then I can apply it to data. And so to me, governance is the doctrine by which you apply your OODA loop effectively, right? How are you, for those not familiar with OODA,
observe, orient,
decide,
determine,
act.
Right. John Boyd. Right.
Yeah.
What was it again? I'm sorry.
The OODA loop, OODA, John Boyd, BOYD.
Yeah, and so it's originally military practice.
Which
but
service
it's-
were you in?
Air Force.
Air Force, okay. He was a fighter pilot.
Yes, but it basically says how do you observe stimuli in the environment and make changes, right? And you have some doctrine that you would apply to do that. And so you think about, you can do this both tactically, but you do it doctrinally, right? You think about the U.S. used to have we do 2 major regional conflicts and a couple of brush wars, was our doctrine, right? That was how we then did everything below it. And so governance is about doctrine. It's about how are we going to attack something. And attack, because I've been in OODA, that's what I use. But it's, I have security governance, and what that means is that I apply security principles to the company in certain ways, and I apply certain processes. And so data just means it's how do you do that with a data-oriented framework, right? Because it's not just how am I doing governance over data, it's how am I doing governance where all of the stimuli that I'm going to look at come out of data. So maybe it's I have this massive checklist of all the data that I have, and I'm going to continuously cycle through it, or I'm going to sort it based on what's good and what's bad and try to clean up the bad stuff. And so those are approaches to governance, is what are the processes you're going to implement to run through it, but what are the principles that you're trying to apply and what are you trying to achieve? And hopefully the answer, which I heard here, which makes me happy, of all governance is how do we make more money? Right? If you are a business and your goal is to make money, then the goal of all governance is how do we make more money?
Question over here?
Yes.
Please.
I've heard today, by the way, in the security world and compliance to security processes and all of that. So far I've heard from your data conversation, you're talking about the integrity of the data and the availability of the data, but how do you incorporate the confidentiality of the data? So how do you capitalize on or incorporate the need to know principle, export control, who has access? I'm interested in how, especially in a data lake where it's aggregated, how do you control that with these 2 important factors?
So when we engage with our business partners, if people are going to do something, because we're effectively a product-oriented company, so you can think of us really doing product governance with data as a thing in there that we're going to look at, or security, is from the security point of view, we ask people one question, and that's all that they really have to answer. And we say, what are your unacceptable losses? Right. This comes out of Nancy Levison's work on the stamp process. And
You should spell that name for her.
Levison is Leveson. Sunnyday.mit.edu is her website. I find that classic that somebody does risk has such a great.
What is that again?
Sunnyday.mit.edu. But Nancy's work, the model says, look, when you want to talk about risk, the first thing that you say is, what is unacceptable to you? And now in that moment, when somebody says, I don't know, which is always the right first answer, we get it a lot, now we can start to bring up those conversations. Well, what are you trying to accomplish? And we're experts in all the things that could go wrong, and we will happily answer for you the question when you ask us, what should I be worried about? But we won't tell you in an unsolicited fashion.
And notice that's a principle, that's a risk avoidance, risk perception
Right.
principle.
Yeah.
Are you consistent with that?
Yeah, so, and again, with governance, we have, to me, it's the rules of engagement, right? So how do you all play in the
military
sandbox
again.
together, right? And we actually have what's called an operating manual that states the rules of engagement. So just because you have a data lake doesn't mean everyone has access to it, right? So we actually tag our data, whether it can be enterprise consumed, it's confidential, or is it as a need to know?
So a classification of data.
Yes, and so based on that.
So you have classified tags.
Classified tags, yeah, is what we're driving to. And then we can use policies. A good example is federal data can only be seen by very few folks, federal customer data. And we implement that policy in the lake, so basically it gets masked and you can't see it. But that still means that you need that governing body to develop the policy and work with legal. Then you need a process with IT to actually execute that policy automatically within the lake.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sir, over there, and you had a question as well?
Well, I have
Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, so thank you for this. So I think.
Can you just tell us who you are, just
Oh,
for
yeah.
context?
So my name is Avi. I run a company called Data High, spun out of MIT. So I had a quick question on, so data lake is great, and we're also trying to solve the problem of data consumption. That's a huge problem with everyone. From a security perspective, from an accessibility perspective, in this rising era of AI and deep learning, have you evaluated things like giving the access to, like you mentioned about cataloging, right? So the business user can actually look through what's there in the data lake and bring in attributes, what they care for, build their own data product in a way. And we call it as cognitive data because, it also solves the recency and the liveliness, and it's always live. And kind of bringing this into a democratization of data products, within the business user, which not just solve the consumption issue, but also keep the quality live. And then, the machine or the AI kind of help in rapid probabilistic unification and the meta, kind of tagging. So do you see this from a security perspective concern, or do you see this as possible direction from an infrastructure people to probably let the data products, like every business user, every use case could have their independent product of data, and they can sort of, keep it going with that. Do you see that? Any concern with that?
Sure. So we have a 4-level governance tier. So we actually have workflow. You come into our portal, say I want to ingest a new data set. That immediately sends an alert to both my team, the governance team, and part of that, we have, say for instance, a 3-day turnaround that we look and see, is there any personally identifiable information? Do we do a risk assessment? And then if that passes and that's okay, then it can go in the data lake. We only govern a few fields when it's in its raw format like that. We don't start a robust governance process until the data is actually shared between multiple workspaces, or it goes up for what we want to call to be operationalized, which means now you have a Tableau workbook and you're going to share that with
Let
the
me
customer.
interject and make a point. What's key is this is near real time in terms of
Yes.
the OODA loop. you have situational awareness as to requests for these exceptional use cases. It's not at the end of 90 days or something like that. You're trying to do this, and you're constructing a pipeline.
Yes, so at all points in time, we also do automated scanning. We'll know which of our innovation workspaces are consuming which data. And they can also bring data into their own workspace without going through the data lake. That's another huge challenge you see. But
you're investing in situational awareness. So
Yeah.
this is not like, back to my example of public boards. I've served on a public board for a multi-billion-dollar company. We would get board books. We didn't get real-time access. Now there are portals where there's access, but this is not every 90 days. This is real-time dynamic process.
Yes.
So we're very similar, although different, in that, in a sense, where we have data wetlands in many places, and in other places we have the data rapids. So, hey, look, I'm going to run with this water analogy. So the telemetry data, which has very little customer information in it. Like, I can tell you, like, how much data was delivered on behalf of a certain customer is as deep as we will get to in that data set. But that data set is about 30 billion rows of data that update every minute. We don't keep it. Every time a row updates, we throw it away.
That's big
Gone.
data.
Right? That's it's moderately sized. But so that data, but we looked at it, and we look at that data we don't classify. Right? We're not going to try to do row by row classifications. We've said if it's in that data set, any Akamai engineer can do whatever they want with it. Right? As long as that's internal. Now, if you want to go productize it, you're going to come to the product review board. But since we want every engineer to have access to it, there's a simple web interface. Actually, you can get direct database access if you want. There's a read-only view. Or there's a web interface where you can write a query, hand it to this web interface, and what the web it'll do is every minute it'll run your query, and it'll capture the data, the output of that query for you, and collect it over time. Automatically graph it, show you whatever you want, so that you don't have to build secondary systems. Because what we found is that you want to sip from this data. Right? It's a fire hose. You want to just pull off little pieces of data at a time, and so we build systems to do it. Our customer logging infrastructure is a much smaller system. It's only adding 40 million rows per second, but that's still pretty substantial. And so that, if you want to build products on top of that, we have an entire architecture that is literally a pipeline. We actually call it the data pipeline.
I'm going to vector in and interrupt. And who's next?
He wanted to argue with me saying we want to make more money.
We'll have a comment from him and then a question. But I just want to do 40, a lot of data. If I were EMC or if I were Akamai and this is this huge chunk of data, there's a part of me that says, geez, isn't there some sort of thing I could mash it up with that would improve my predictive analytics along some dimension? Because when you're dealing with that levels of data, efficiencies, tiny things might lead to non-trivial efficiencies. How easy or difficult is it in your governance environment to either ask for that, geez, this is a lot of data, should we be getting more value from it, or for somebody to bootleg or transparently pilot something to create a novel predictive analytic?
So we make it really as easy as possible for people to do novel things. And the thing that's interesting is it's easier to do novel things on the 40 billion row data set than on the 20 million row data set. Because that 40 billion rows is merely telemetry. So we're more comfortable with random engineer goes and looks at it. We actually use that for incident response. One of the advantages we have
They're in
is
the telemetry business. EMC's in the telemetry business big time. They're doing remote.
Yep.
So do you have the same kind of situation?
Yes.
And then the data that goes specifically about customers is harder for a couple reasons.
Right.
One is we can't actually directly throw that data away. We have to collect it all and splice it up and send it out to customers. So we build a pipeline to do that. If you want to add something into the pipeline, you would say, hey, I want to split the data here and take a look at it.
Right.
That's engineering,
Right.
but it's still doable. So we try to make it as easy as possible. And we have an entire mapping organization that is trying to predict what the internet will be doing in the next 60 seconds. That's a hard problem.
But I was going to say, this is doctrine, making it as easy as possible as opposed to you have to go over this hurdle. That's a non-trivial thing. Sir.
So I just wanted to take a moment to go back to the comment that goal of all governance is how do we make more money. I think while that might be a goal, an important goal, important measure of the success of governance, I think there's another aspect of the reason that we do governance, or the reason that we need governance, is what good are we doing? I mean, money is not the only measure of good. We can make money doing bad things. And if we're not taking into account, as you said earlier, some of the, I mean, maybe you were only thinking of financial risks when you mentioned risks, or, I mean, I think of it as good and evil in some situations.
I just want to be fair to Barbara, in fairness, she's also in charge of customer experience, and so this is not, presumably you're dealing with these trade-offs between what is best for the customers versus what is best for EMC's cash flow all the time, and I presume that's a big part of your governance debates on this, is how do we err on the side of improved experience?
Yes.
Well, and I hope it is, and that's why I was
Yes.
shocked that John would say all governance.
How can you be shocked by what John says?
I'm not John, so I mean, John keeps like
I'm
so.
fine. I'm
So
looking
actually,
at
I
the
want
emails.
to address that one.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
it's very dangerous to think of in terms of good and evil in a business setting. First of all, not everybody will agree with you on what is good or evil. And so they sound like, rather than here's a rational reasoned argument why we shouldn't do a thing, it sounds like you're trying to shame somebody and compel them in some fashion.
And that was.
And the big challenge is when I say your goal is to make more money, what I left out of that was wisely, right? Is that we want to make wise risk decisions. And now the challenge, the reason that we need to have governance is because we have lots of evidence that says that there will be people who will make tactical decisions to make more money tomorrow that is not wise. It will cost the business later. We will, let's go sell, our product to Iran, not realizing that will put us out of business in a year. Like, whether you think that's a good choice or an evil choice or a neutral choice, it's not a wise choice. And so quite often you can take the things that we would categorize as good and evil, and I do believe in good and evil, just to be clear. But almost every time I've said, wow, I don't want to do that, that would be evil, I can come up with a rational argument for why that's not wise and why that will cost us more money in the long run. Where the risk is, and the risk might be nebulous, right? It might be that, wow, if we do this thing and get caught, like, here's what it will do to our business. Like, I could totally go sell all of my customers' data, and I could have a great Q1. Actually, not have a great, a great Q1. Well, I might not be able to sell it this course, maybe a great Q2, but I have a horrible Q4, and I'm gone next year because nobody's going to do business with me anymore. EMC's got the same thing, right? They could make a ton of money selling everything in the data warehouse right now. Somebody would pay for it. But who would do business with EMC the next week?
But I think it's about brand protection too, right?
Right.
So part of what we do.
Touche,
yeah.
that's one of the words that hasn't been discussed here. I am amused, and I'm grateful that you bring it up. We've sort of decoupled the values of governance from the values of the brands that an EMC or an Akamai represents. So please, how is that dealt with?
Again, I think they're balancing through our executive councils, right? The short-term and long-term gains. So we use them as really our compass to try to decide. Again, there's some very short-term programs we want to implement to maybe drive up revenue, but there's also a more longer-term roadmap of where we want to go.
So then I have to ask this before we go to the next question. Are you a little or a lot nervous as to the shift in brand value and brand proposition from an EMC to a Dell?
I'd say, I'd say it's a really good merger for the two companies.
Right.
From my perspective, it's a lot of opportunity in my area, specifically in governance, right? So we do believe we have a strong program and framework that we'd like to share with Dell. So from my perspective, it only strengthens, a good governance program will only strengthen that partnership.
Do you think you're going to influence them more than they're going to influence you?
I hope
on
I
the
do.
governance side?
Yes. They don't have a data governance officer yet,
Yeah.
so I hope so.
You and then you, okay? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'm at MathWorks. I'm
Oh, where?
leading
Good company.
couple of efforts, one within the engineering department around analytics and another much broader. We're trying to clean up our data sewer, I think I'll take it. But so I want to get back to data stewardship. My question is, who are the data stewards in your organizations, and I'll give a sort of a negative example. I could see a company where a software engineer instruments a product, creates a new data stream or data source, eventually looks at it, says, hey, builds a report, shows it to the director says, this is great, I want this every month. Suddenly this software engineer is a data steward, an analyst, and he's not writing software anymore. So I think that's a negative pattern. What's the right answer? Who are the data stewards?
So I'd say whenever I start a program, and by the way, the last 3 companies I've gone in, they did not have governance programs. I joined EMC, they said the last 2 left, so what are you going to bring to the table to make this work, right? So I think governance struggles a bit, right, in places. So I always do 2 things. I talk to the executives first and go in and I'll interview them on what are their top business objectives. Secondly, I'll go down to the people who suffer the most in their day-to-day activities and ask them their challenges. So to me, a data steward, in my office, there's probably only 5 full-time data stewards. So our overall data governance office has very few full-time stewards, right? So if you're thinking you're gonna start a big organization, you're gonna have 12
Do they have it on their
stewards.
card?
Yeah,
Is it a part-
yeah, they have chief data stewards on their card, yes. And it grew. So I started with one for customer first, the customer domain, and then it grew. We just onboarded one for install base and professional services. So actually I have an open rec, anyone interested, right, for install base steward. So it grows over time depending on what your company wants to focus on, but should be, unless you're in the data governance office, it should, I'm going to say, be less than 5 to 10% of your job. You attend a council every other week, you bring the problems forward, and then you might be asked to attend a Kaizen. And, you know, as we focus on what's called critical data elements, and I'm going to say that's less than probably 2% of all the fields used in tables. And, you know, you approach it in a pragmatic way. So data steward or data quality is part of everyone's job. So I believe the folks in the business, again, it should be very smart, a small portion of their job. And these are really the knowledge experts that you want to
What makes a
retain.
data steward at EMC? What makes a data steward?
I actually have found at EMC there's a passion for folks to want to fix the processes that are broken. So
So it's process orientation.
yes, it's process orientation. Yes.
So I think that the example you gave is not a data steward. I might go with a data concierge or maybe a data valet, as long as we're, naming them. Right?
Concierges in the wetlands are very popular.
Well, no. So I see this a lot, which is you have people in your organization that have a day job and they have some amount of surplus, right? They have the free time that they can do to say, oh, let me go solve a problem. And that free time is some of those valuable time companies have, right? Because often the people who have it are the people who can produce extraordinary value. You said, look, it takes 1 FTE to solve this problem, and they're solving it in 3/4 of an FTE, right? You want more of them. And so they take that quarter of their time to go solve some other problems. And the reality is they're actually only solving it in 50% of an FTE, but you've already consumed 1/4 of their time dealing with like the rest of the company. So they've got this quarter left, and that's valuable. And so they go and they say, I could go into this data, and I can pull something out and show it to you. And that thing apparently had value to the executive who saw it. Right? And the problem is now, rather than saying, wow, this is valuable, how do we get more of it without now consuming 5% of your time? Right? We say, I just want you to keep doing this for me. And so we just added more work to that person, but we haven't let them systematize it. And many organizations, we actually don't let them. Like if you want to go dig into the data and do manual analysis that's going to take 5% of your time, that's okay. But if you're going to take a month to create a system that will produce a report automatically, we won't let you do that. Right? That's a very standard model in many companies because it's not your job to build that system.
We're too busy to do it right.
No, it's not even we're too busy. That's a piece of it. It's not your job. We will tell
It's
people
not your job to do it right.
the problem is that the data concierge and data valet often is not part of the data steward. That the people who are the stewards of the data and of the systems, whose job it would be to produce the report, have not done so. Somebody else from outside saw a way to take that data and turn it into actionable intelligence, and they're not empowered to build a system to do it because it's not part of their business unit. It's not their job. They should go do something else. But by the way, keep giving me this report on the sly every month.
Right.
But that's the essence of a governance issue.
Yes.
Thanks. I'm with Eagle Investment Systems, so our clients are institutional asset managers. One of the things that they struggle with is creating a common business glossary. I was just curious as to if you have one of those in your organization, and how did you go about putting it together?
So I can talk to that. We do, because we do have the portal, we call it the Information Help Desk. So it's not easy, because I can give you firsthand experience. I sat in a room. So how do we find data stewards? We have a problem with install base, for instance. So we tapped 40 of the key people across the company who deal with install base data day to day, brought them together. I think, did you sit in some of those, Steve? It took us 4 days, 40 people, God knows how many hours, to finally say what is install base. We came to agreement, so we were all happy. We weren't leaving that meeting. And that goes into our business glossary now, where anyone in the company can go look up business terms, right? So we've asked each of the councils that are running to, again, take their top 40 to 50 attributes that are most commonly used and get agreement on the councils as to what is the business term. And it's logged into the catalog.
I cannot stress, there's a certain irony here, because this very session began on the notion of semantics and ontology, and it really does come back. When you have a diversity of these things, how you manage metadata, the data that describe business costs, installed base, that's going to, who's the gentleman who made the comment, 30 different definitions. You'll have the same different definition, installed base with 30 different. You think you default to these things. So the whole notion of a glossary, and forgive me, the way you tag that, and the way it gets aggregated and synthesized and stuck into a predictive analytics issue, because installed base for a service might be different than an install with recurring revenue, may be done differently than install base for a product. That is a big deal. How well do you think you guys manage metadata in this area?
I think there's been much more of a renewed focus in it, because, again, it's a journey. This journey's been 4 years in the making, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. I think that we're well into having a very good metadata catalog now, but I have to say it's been a little painful to try to find the stewards.
But this is key, business glossary and metadata catalog. Those are not the same thing. Those are different things.
Right, so on our business catalog, again, has terms with definitions, tied back to tables with business semantic meaning, tied back to the actual, what I'm going to call, most people are more familiar with, is traditional BI modeling, where you have some BI developer who puts a table name on it, but no one really knows what it means, right? We're actually able now to go to that whole lineage on each one of those and tag them back.
I'm envious.
And I'm just curious, are you using any particular platforms or tools
Yes.
to?
Yes, so we use the Informatica platform for MDM and data quality, and we use the Calibra platform for governance.
The what? I'm sorry.
It's called Calibra, COLLIBRA.
Who owns this catalog, or who's responsible for updating it, maintaining it?
The data stewards, so I'd say the overall data governance platform, and we've branded it the Information Help Desk or Data Governance Center, is managed and has the oversight from the Data Governance Office. The chief stewards, again, work with their respective councils to go and maintain that. So I call it crowdsourcing. If you can't crowdsource, you're in a lot of trouble, because there's no one in, say, an office where I am that's going to understand the business language of all of those.
But I want to stress this is an organizing principle as well, because I have firsthand worked with organizations that doesn't let the crowd define things, because top management has a vision and conformance compliance. So this is a non-obvious thing that you're hearing here, and it's the kind of issue that needs to be discussed, or at least people need to be aware of in their organization. I just want to say, in the interest of time, it's 10:20. We're happy to stay for another few minutes on this, but I just want to say, we've had a full conversation here. I just want to preliminarily, for those of you who want to go, I want to thank our panel. We're around here. We're here till the end. So, any other questions? Okay, sir.
Mike Grant with the City of Boston. We're in the developmental stage of our analytics and data governance process. And one of the conversations I feel like we need to have follows two different topics. One is a sense of what your tolerance is for accuracy. You know, having our business sponsors, having our, dashboard users, working with them to define, well, kind of like when you do a poll within plus or minus 1%, 5%, 10%, for the data that we work with, that isn't always, you don't have consistent values for every single record. You don't have, or you have changing definitions, so you might have some contradictory information. Do you discuss with your constituents, if you will, this idea of tolerating a certain amount of inaccuracy that might appear in the data? Because otherwise, I spend all day chasing down and reconciling inconsistencies.
Don't use relational databases.
And the other concept is sustainability. I look at a lot of what we do in government. We have programs come and go. We have people come and go. We have systems that were maintained last year, but they're not maintained this year. It speaks partly to the sense of obsolescence. And how do you handle that if you have those kinds of situations? How do you handle that from both of those are really from a expectation setting perspective. How do you set those expectations?
How do you sunset a database? Or a data
I
set?
don't think we ever have. No, we.
So it's a hard question because most people don't understand what inaccuracy means and how it could hurt them. So we try to wrap that up in our original question: what are your unacceptable losses? And we might talk about inaccuracy in those terms. As an example, we are in the middle of killing off our very first product.
Right.
We've been around for 18 years, and we're finally killing the first product we launched. Like, we have technologies built on top of it that you can still buy, but the way you integrated it, can't do that anymore. And so step one is identify the handful that still use it, create grandfathering data around them so that they can still use it, and block it for everybody else. And one of the questions we ask is, well, how do you know if somebody's using it, the product? Because you might not have the right data. The data might be inaccurate. And so what is your tolerance for risk? How long will you monitor to see if you can spot somebody using it? If they only use it once a month, are you willing to wait a month to try to spot them? And it turned out we waited 6 months collecting data, and yesterday went and said, okay, we have all the data. We know everybody who's using it. We turn it off for everybody except those 600. Turned out we had one of our customers that we'd caught like a whole bunch of their uses and not one of these uses because it only pops up leading into tax season. And so we turn it off the day that they start using it again. And like, now, minor impact for them because it was their soft launch, they haven't yet advertised it, but it's horribly embarrassing. But we had caught this, right? When we're talking about unacceptable losses, we knew in turning it off that we were going to hurt a customer. Absolutely.
That makes sense.
And we said it is going to be an acceptable loss because there's no way to turn this off without hurting a customer at some point. We just want to minimize the pain. And as pains go, this was as small as it could have been. I mean, we're fine with this level of pain. But that's a hard conversation. I worry more about inaccuracies in data that lead to dangerous decisions, that people don't understand that plus or minus threshold, or how this data could, what's the difference between the false positives and the false negatives, and those are far more worrisome. And I suspect you have some interesting challenges there. For those not familiar, by the way, with what the city of Boston is doing with data, it is fantastically amazing. And if you're looking for somebody to model yourself on, you could do much, much worse than looking at what the city's doing.
It's going through a revolution that
Yes.
a lot of people working on.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're good to go. We're happy to answer questions in the interim. But again, a real pleasure. And just as good as these people are, this has been a terrific conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.